Good afternoon, everybody. We're glad to be here, and we're glad to share the work that I think we're all doing in adaptive courseware. It's pretty exciting. So let me just start with a little bit about the Personalized Learning Consortium. Quite honestly, came out of some of the work that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was funding about 4 years ago, and where they were very interested in personalized learning. And a group of the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, which represents about 237 institutions, 43 systems, public research universities, had started participating in a consortium model to think about how to work together towards these leveraging effective technologies, particularly around learning. And that was carried forward when we were able to successfully land a very generous grant, again, from the foundation. So some of the work the foundation has also put together has been with previous research partners, and one of those partners is the Titan Partners, and they have helped us define. Now, this is not necessarily meant to be definitive, right? But what we really focus on in our work is around the fact that this is about data-driven, and it is about sequenced, and it is these systems responding to student input. We don't prescribe to have one solution. In fact, there's a set of vendors that these universities can choose from. And we're pretty excited by the work, and we do believe that adaptive learning, as our keynote put earlier, is not the silver bullet. The courseware and the technology is not the silver bullet, but having the data and being able to prescribe a set of content to students is part of the silver bullet, right? The other part is clearly still the faculty, and particularly in our grants, these are all I should say, they were intended to be all for face-to-face, but some of our universities are trying them in blended classrooms as well as online classrooms as well. So we think adaptive is going to be helpful, particularly around giving faculty data that they just did not have access to before. And in that grant, we have 8 universities: Arizona State, Colorado State, Georgia State, who is here with me. We have Oregon State, Portland State, University of Louisville, and University of Mississippi, who is also represented here today. This grant was very directed to general education, 100, maybe 200 level courses. So this is an area where there's a fair amount of content selection amongst vendors, but there are also platform tools. We did not give enough funding to anyone to go recreate, quote unquote, the best course, right? This is a scaling grant. So because we started at the 100 level and we thought the marketplace had some reasonable choice, we have pushed our institutions to look at off-the-shelf products all the way through customized products where you could easily put in either your content or OER types of content. And the faculty are getting some incentives for doing this work. The work also pays for someone to actually be a program manager, and that is a particularly important job at most of these institutions. And we think those things are probably necessary ingredients to help these kinds of scale opportunities move forward at institutions. So I have to say, I've only been executive director since August of last year, and a lot of this groundwork was put together by my predecessor, Dr. Megan Duff, who is now at EDUCAUSE, and it's been fabulous to work with these folks. I think you're seeing a lot of innovation and willingness to work together. I think this graph tells you there's a difference in scale, right? Like some people are scaling faster than others, but overall, we have in 1 year, this group of 8 institutions already have 40,000 enrollments across a group of 25 courses. And I will show you most of the disciplines, again, because this is general education. You can see that the disciplines are very focused on what we would consider normally gen ed. The foundation was willing to tell us that we could, scope that for high impact courses, because as you can guess, like accounting sometimes is a high impact if you have 25% of your students who are trying to be, successful in business. So we are seeing both a non-STEM as well as a humanities and social science interest. There are a couple of caveats you should know about. I mean, I think the difference from the keynote at lunchtime was that we are requesting that faculty who teach the same course work together, right? Like, we're not saying you have to have 100%, but we are saying that you have to have a majority, and hopefully it will scale to 100% of the sections. That's a very different flavor. That is not happening across the board, because in some of our institutions, only one faculty member actually teaches the course for that particular discipline, right? But overall, we are seeing faculty who are willing to work together at that 100 level. This is very different in public research universities. You see a little bit more of this at our community colleges, who have already coordinated faculty around one syllabus, one textbook, et cetera. But for public research universities, this is a very different process. But again, yes, we know the funding is important, but we are also seeing that these people are committed to delivering a better set of student outcomes. We are very targeted to those at-risk students, and specifically low-income and minority students. And most of these universities are also, in their student success work, very interested in making sure that student success is not just achieved on the advising reform side, but it's also achieved in the academic classroom. So again, we're excited about the work that we're doing. We think we're learning a lot. Within the next couple of months, we'll be releasing some more reports, but this work goes on through December 31st of 2019. So you'll be hearing probably too much from us, but I think this is an opportunity for all institutions to begin looking at those really high DFW courses or those high impact courses, and what can we do differently now that we have some emerging technology that could really help us begin to understand the problems. And I think that's it for me, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Tammy Goulet. I'm a professor at the University of Mississippi in the Department of Biology, and I'm going to be speaking from the trenches. So there are multiple courses and multiple departments that are involved at the University of Mississippi, but I'm going to be focusing on the course that we are dealing with in biology. And that course is BISC 102. It's Inquiry into Life, Human Biology. We have about 2,000 students annually that take the course. We have 6 different instructors that teach the course. We had decided on one textbook, so we have one textbook, we have one chapters, we have decided on the chapters that we're covering in that textbook. And then as part of this, actually before the grant started, we had decided that we were going to use adaptive learning in it. But there are things that you need to adapt when you use adaptive learning. So I'm going to be referring to those. Oop, wrong way. Okay, so one of the things about learning that I've noticed as a faculty teaching these non-majors is that I am not a walking textbook. And I realized that very early on when I started teaching nearly 20 years ago. And because I'm not a walking textbook, the textbook has become more and more important to me because I'm assuming that they need to come into class prepared in order for us to go beyond the textbook and get into higher order thinking skills and understand the content. In addition to that, I view my role as a facilitator of learning. And so that's my approach to education in general, and particularly for these non-majors. Many of them take the course because the College of Liberal Arts requires 3 science courses, and so this is a very popular one. Now, as for them, you tell them to read the textbook, you tell them the textbook is important, they don't read the textbook. And so this noble idea of let's start from the textbook and go on from there does not materialize. And in addition to that, or because they don't read the textbook, they're not prepared for class. And so you can't get to those levels. And so that's why when we were evaluating textbooks and when we decided to change textbooks after 10 years of being with the same textbook, we were evaluating books that could handle and had a learning platform associated with it. So the textbook that we decided to go with is a McGraw-Hill product, it so happens, and it's a non-majors biology book. And the first change that we did was, as opposed to requiring a hard copy textbook, we required an ebook that comes packaged with the Connect, which is their learning platform, and it has Learn Smart as well. And so we are basically having all of them purchase that, so they have access to the ebook. They can get a hard copy if they want to purchase that on top of that, but they also have access to the online adaptive platform. And so the Learn Smart component is the adaptive component. There's also within Connect aspects where you can do homework assignments and things like that. So one of the things that we had to adapt is actually the grading, because if you don't assign points to students doing something, they're not going to do it. And so you have to assign a minimum of 20% of the grade into doing that. And we're learning that as we're going along, because I originally assigned less. And then the investment, or we get about 75% of the students that participate. So we want it to be higher. So the adapting to adaptive, one of the huge strengths of the adaptive courseware is that you get a lot of different reports. So obviously the biggest strength is that the students are reading the book. What happens is when they read the book, they're posed with questions, and if they do not answer the questions correctly, they basically get the same topic and different questions until they master that concept, right? And so that is very, and then on my end, I get reports. So I get a report, there are a lot of different reports. I can see the most frequently missed questions. I can see the students that have not answered or not done the assignments, and then I can email them. I can see the at-risk students. So it gives me a lot of information about the class that I can tackle even before I come into class. As far as the disadvantages, so one of the disadvantages with, and this is not just the McGraw-Hill product, it was across all the ones that we evaluated that had an adaptive component, by the sheer nature of being adaptive, right? So the computer program has to do, if this happens, then do that. If this happens, then you can't manipulate it, right? And so because it is a black box, you don't know what questions the students are facing in any particular section. You can deselect sections, so I can choose, okay, we're not covering a particular topic, so I don't want them to see that. But then sometimes the missed questions are questions that I don't emphasize in class, but I can't deselect those, although they're working to more fine-tune the selection process. But that is a part because you cannot tweak with it, right? And so as the questions are worded, that's what the students see. The other thing is that the students, and that has been a learning curve as far as the student interpretation. And before I show you how I hopefully solved that this semester, the students also get reports that are their own individual performance, so they can see what questions they missed, and so that is also very advantageous. So the reporting is not just for me as a faculty member, but also for them. So as far as the student interpretation, the problems that I had since we started using the adaptive courseware is that students would do the assignments, they would get 100% because I allowed repeated attempts, and they thought that they were going to get an A in the course, and then they went to take the exam and they got a C. And they're like, what is going on? What is happening is these adaptive, at least in biology, all of the adaptive platforms that I'm aware of are asking factual questions. They're not asking higher order questions. Their purpose is to read and understand the basic knowledge of the book, and then you take it from there. So this semester, I tried introducing the adaptive courseware by giving this slide, where I said that class time it is spent for knowledge, for application, and for analysis. And then I told them Learn Smart is the aspect that you do ahead of class, and that's very important as well, and that's something that we as faculty are working on. When do you actually assign these assignments? And so it's most effective to assign them before they come into class so that they're ready. So I use the analogy of watching a movie. So hopefully, do you guys know what movie that is? Okay, so if you've never seen Finding Nemo, you may not even know who Nemo is. And you may not know where it happened. And you may not know who Dory is. So I equated Learn Smart to watching a movie. If you have to watch the movie in order to be engaged in the discussion about the movie, if you hadn't watched the movie and you hadn't read about it, you wouldn't know who these characters were and where it happened. So these are kind of basic information. Now, once we have that basic information, then we can all talk about the subtleties in the movie and the nuances and the mistakes in the movie. So, for example, I can tell you as a biologist that Marlin should have been Marlena because anemone fish change sex. And so the largest anemone fish is a female, so the mom died, so Marlin should have changed sex and become a female. So we can get into that, but that's only after you go through Learn Smart. And then so I tell them that after we learn that, then we can do the homework, which is meant to reiterate concepts. And in our case, we also have supplemental instruction, which is peer-based tutoring. So all of those together. But I tried to explain the analogy because, adaptive learning is powerful, but you have to know what it is and what it can do and what it can't do, and especially from both the perspective of a faculty member, but also a perspective of a student, assuming that if they get every single question correct, they know the material, well, they know the facts, but then they need to learn how to apply it. And that has been a progression in our course.
Okay. I'm Tim Fleming again from Georgia State University. And I want to actually just take my few minutes here to talk a little bit about how we have scaled out adaptive learning into multiple sections of our courses. We've taken, I don't know if it's different from how other schools have, or institutions have rolled it out. We've taken a little bit more of an experimental approach. Maybe we're a bit more conservative and a little bit more tentative about just throwing adaptive learning on students the way that it sometimes can get employed. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about kind of our study and the progression over the years of how we've started implementing some of the adaptive technology in our courses at the university. Year one of the project for us was really exploration. We were learning about, as faculty members, what adaptive learning is and what these different platforms and coursewares can actually bring to both us and the students. And so we had a vendor courseware vendors come in and had a sort of fair of sorts where we would sit down and evaluate each of the bits of courseware and really figure out which one of the vendors offered what was the best for our courses. Year 2, which is what we're in right now, is what we're calling our pilot study. If I could read a little bit closer here. One of the main things that we are incorporating into our pilot study this year is a comparison between adaptive and non-adaptive courses. So we are implementing some adaptive technology in some sections of our courses and not in others, and doing a little bit more of a quantitative analysis of whether we see improvements in initially just in DFW rates in our high impact courses. But within each department, we're investigating a few other measures that I can get into as well. And then year 3 is going to be our full scale, where we implement the technology in every one of the sections of the courses that are involved. I probably don't need to go into too much detail about just what we did do in year 1. I just have this slide here to remind myself, to remind all of you really, that selecting the courseware that's right for the course that you teach and that can work for you and your students is really important. I think almost every one of our courses initially had a different selection of the platform that they wanted to use. You can see on here some of our courses went with a platform called Realize It, which is really just the platform itself with no content, then content has to be fed into that. In psychology, we went with Macmillan, and then in both of our econ courses went with McGraw-Hill. And it's not to say that there are absolute pros and cons across the board for each one of the platforms, but really just in how our faculty are teaching it. And in some regard, how that, in the case of publishers, how that publisher's content really speaks to our students. In the psychology department, we paid a lot of attention to the actual content that the publisher was providing, and really whether that textbook or ebook that we're implementing here was a good fit for our students. One of the main considerations was just whether or not we could find a text that was interesting to read. If it had a lot of graphs and figures and things like that that initially sound a little bit superficial, but if one of the things that we want to do is get more engagement with the textbook, it has to be a textbook that the students are willing to engage with. Here you can see for how we are scaling things out. It's not too important to look at all the numbers, but if you just kind of look at the totals on each one of those charts to show you the totals of the number of students enrolled that are being involved in these scalings each year. We're starting with just really a handful of sections in each one of our courses, because every course has multiple sections in it. And again, it's usually the sections right now in which we're implementing this and collecting some data that the course coordinators are teaching, like myself, and some of the more permanent instructors, professors and lecturers that are a bit more invested. Part of the reason that we have chosen to scale a little bit more slowly is because in a lot of our introductory courses, we have a lot of adjunct professors who may only be at the university for a year or so. And so they may not be familiar with the technology, and there's a bit of expertise that has to be gained by course coordinators and permanent faculty so that we can then impart that knowledge of how the platform works and how we use it and how we implement it with our students, that we want to make sure that we've got a good handle on as the more permanent faculty before we try to ask our adjunct instructors to do that for all of our sections. I just want to talk a little bit about kind of what we hope to do with not just the data, but the project itself. We do a lot of coordinating with our department chairs and other faculty across sections. I am the course coordinator for our introductory psychology course, and we generally teach in the fall 12 sections and in the spring about 6 sections, usually aside from myself by all different instructors. So there is a lot of effort put into consistency across sections, not to take away academic freedom and all, but we're asking everyone to use the same text, and as part of the study, we'll ask everyone to use the same courseware and to use it in very similar ways. And as Tamar said, it's part of their grade, and we ask also that it be about 20% of their grade. And that kind of grading policy has to be consistent across sections, so there is a bit of coordination there. And just speaking to the involvement of the department chairs, one of the things that we're also sort of co-opting some data here for is assessment of learning outcomes. In psychology, we're particularly interested not just in our DFW rates, which we obviously care about, but what that does for specific learning outcomes for us by the APA, and some departmental guidelines that we look at sort of effectiveness therein with the adaptive courseware. Just speaking to data collection for a second, I'll show you a little bit of some preliminary results from last semester on some survey questions that we asked the students, in addition to learning outcomes and DFW rates and more widely available academic institutional data. We're interested in whether or not the students like it. It's important to us before we just decide as 2 or 3 faculty members in the department that, yep, this is best for our students, so we're just going to push it on everyone and hope that it works for the next couple of years. We really are interested in students' feedback, not just in whether it's working for them, whether they like it or not, but whether they're engaging with it because they like it, or are they using it or just engaging in it because we make them for a grade. You know, they'll do a lot for a grade, but it is important that for further learning's sake, that motivation is increased and we're fostering the right kinds of motivation in our students. And the last thing really I put on here as part of our community building and kind of beyond the grant, it's really important that we're able to use this data beyond just this year and next year and as part of the grant too. We are doing a lot to help the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at our institution develop workshops, coordinate programs with faculty, not just to teach them how to use courseware, but to discuss kind of better pedagogical practices across the board. And beyond just some of the things that are on this list too, a couple of things that we've discussed in the last few weeks is that it's really important for us to not only be able to implement this and have a successful data collection plan for the grant, but to be able to potentially use this kind of technology from here on out, whether it's part of a grant or not. A lot of us that are teaching the introductory psychology course, and I believe in other courses as well at Georgia State, are now pretty invested in what the adaptive courseware can do. And we're not going to just, drop it like a hot potato once the grant is over. It's something that whether or not we see great, significant, statistically significant improvement in our DFW rates, if the students are liking it, if it's giving them any benefit in their development of study skills, if it's giving them any benefit, self-perceived benefit to their grade, it's worth having. And it's worth potentially implementing long-term. So it's something that we want to do just beyond the few years of the grant. I'll just give you just really quick 2 overview slides of some of the survey data that we're collecting. Like I said, asking students whether or not they like it. This is how would you rate the overall quality. One of the things that we were concerned about as faculty when we were choosing the courseware was whether or not it was user-friendly. We've used some platforms by publishers that were not maybe the most user-friendly, and so it was important to us that it's easy to use. In previous courses that I had taught, I know that I had students who were kind of giving up on some of these activities because the platforms were too difficult to use. Oh, well, I couldn't get it to do what I wanted to do, so I didn't do the homework. Well, we don't want our students to give up either, so usability is really important. You can see across really all of our courses here, they would rate the overall quality relatively high. And then this just shows opinions on whether or not they think that the courseware had an impact on their overall course grade. And overwhelmingly, the students are saying either a lot or maybe just a little bit or about the same, that the impact was positive on their grade. We've got some data that suggests, and I don't want to put it up just yet today, because we're still kind of milling through it from last semester, suggests that they are reading more, that they actually really enjoy doing homework. We had to look at that one 2, 3, 4, 5 times. We're still looking at it. They actually like the activities, and that is really, really important just to foster sort of a better attitude for learning moving forward.
Might have to click through a little bit because he had a few things left.
We'll click through.
Excellent. I'm excited because I love Finding Nemo. So if I don't take anything else away, I've learned something new about Finding Nemo. I'm gonna have to go back and watch this again. So thank you, Tamar. Anyway, good afternoon. It's a blessing to be here with you. My name is Tom Hinckley. I'm Director of Solutions Architecture for McGraw-Hill, but probably more importantly to this group, I actually wear another hat. I'm a subject matter expert for an introductory computer course that runs about 120 sections a year of 25 students per section. So I'm excited to be here in the room with you because in my role as Director of Solutions Architecture, I get the privilege of building tools that ultimately hopefully make your job easier implementing things like adaptive courseware. So privileged to be here with you. I'll give you 2 numbers because for the course that I'm the subject matter expert for, we implemented both an adaptive solution as well as inclusive access, meaning day 1. And the 2 big numbers that, at least from our study and my course, are first we saw our student success rates go from 62% to 85% in the matter of a year. And then this sounds like an odd second number, but it's pretty important to your universities. We saw our help desk call percentage drop by 72%. That's calls to the university help desk in that regard. So just a bit there from the other hat that I wear. But anyway, very excited to be here with you today and to sponsor this session. I'll be the first to say I'm not on the sales side of things, I'm on the product side of things, and again, I get excited about us building tools that ultimately help to make your jobs easier as faculty and ultimately puts the learning at the forefront for students. So McGraw-Hill is an organization, and the slide that I have up here is that if you walk away from this session, at least the portion here, thinking, oh, he thinks that ebooks are a success and it's just moving from a physical book to something digital, then that's failure. That's not what we're after. That's the age-old VHS to DVD type of equation, right? It's not just the medium of which content is being delivered. But ultimately at McGraw-Hill, when you see things from us about our investments, we've done about $700 million over the past 6 years of technology investment into building platforms that are centered around adaptive learning and ultimately demonstrating measurable learning outcomes within the courses that all of you are teaching. So as it relates to us as a company, while we're typically referred to as a publisher, where most of our investment has been is in the idea of learning science and specifically adaptive learning. And it's this idea of continuous improvement to where it's no longer we just put a textbook in the hands of the students and say, hopefully go read chapters 1, 2, and 3, right? But we can now tag this content and be able to show, are the students actually progressing through their reading? As we give them different challenge questions with confidence ratings, it allows us to go and measure and identify where within the text that's being presented to the students, where students aren't exactly grasping the concepts. So it helps to better inform our authors and so on and so forth. The next time that they come back, it's no longer, oh, I just think I'll revise this paragraph or that paragraph type of thing. We can actually see how long students are spending on a page, what learning objectives they're struggling with, and we can use that idea of continuous improvement to continually develop better products for you as you're teaching. So this is really the fabric of kind of us as a learning science company. When we get into the idea of adaptive learning, you'll see three kind of chart, well, this one chart, but 3 different lines. And as you look basically at conventional learning versus mastery learning versus a tutorial, which obviously we all would love to have a one-on-one interaction with each student that's in our class, right? Because I've spoken with many of you today, and I know that you have a heart for the students, and ideally you'd love to sit across the table and do that with them. But this conference is about how we can scale some of these ideas, right? So the idea and the approach that we've taken with adaptive learning at McGraw-Hill is creating these tools that just as Tamara was saying, and Tim as well, to where you can use these tools sometimes before a student comes to class or after a student comes to class, and really start to hone in on, here are the specific learning objectives that I need to highlight or cover, or a midweek announcement, those different types of things that make it a much more personalized experience for the student as we're going through. Just a little bit, I mentioned a few pieces of data from at least the course that I teach, but another course and some research that we've done, Alex is our math adaptive platform, and where we've done a lot of research, and it's based on the idea of connecting specific learning statements and learning objectives to one another, and you end up with this large constellation-like idea of where you must grasp one learning concept before you move on to the next, and it looks at the interrelation between each of those, moving the student through the most optimal path. So some of the research that you'll see, we did a mashup of slide decks, and it looks like this one did not come across appropriately, but basically the idea behind this is I think it was over, roughly just over 6,000 students type of thing, moving from a 35% pass rate up to a 70% pass rate, because it was the movement from just fitting everyone into the same type of course to where take these 4 exams or whatever it is, and the adaptive nature not exactly scaling to that point. So you've heard 2 terms that both Tim and Tamar had referenced: Learn Smarter, SmartBook, and that's by and large McGraw-Hill's largest push as far as adaptive learning technologies. And what you see here is a heat map and kind of what I was referencing before. And if you have not seen some of our adaptive technologies, would love to be able to share those with you. But effectively, we're able to go through the text itself and highlight or change coloring, bold, so on and so forth, the different areas that are unique for that student to best learn. So based upon feedback that we're getting with confidence ratings, how long they're spending in the course, some of those types of things, it moves us from an environment to where 15 years ago on one end of the spectrum you had pure reading, and on the other end was pure assessment, and you had no idea if the reading was actually taking place. Now there's this middle ground to where, again, with adaptive learning and probing of the students, you can start to modify the text and identify where a student needs to spend potentially more time as they're going through. So every single one of our products that has been in development over the past 3 years has been with an adaptive focus, going through SmartBook, so on and so forth. And then one thing that was mentioned was, again, the data and just how important that is, because it's not just, hey, let's throw a cool whiz-bang technology in front of our students and hope that it works. So probably one of the neatest things that I'm able to do is start to give insights into a couple different, for a couple different individuals that are involved in the course. So an example of what you see in front of you is no longer just, did they get a question right or wrong, but because we're tagging our content, imagine a giant 300-page textbook, because we're tagging that down to the specific learning objective level, we can go through and tell you with accuracy, not just students that are getting questions wrong, but that by and large a significant portion of your class is, say, struggling with the concept of supply and demand curve. So that helps to inform maybe a midweek announcement or a supplementary YouTube video or Khan Academy or whatever the case may be to really bolster what's being used in that course. Likewise, so for the instructor, figuring out how the students are doing. So as they're going through with the idea of heat maps, and if on the y-axis is time in the course, and on the x-axis is basically the student's score in the course, we can start to pull out and identify students that are spending a ton of time in the course, but not necessarily having a high grade in that regard. So those are your students that are struggling. Likewise, you can identify students that are scoring extremely well, but not spending much time in the course, and possibly that's either some fantastic students or maybe some students that we need to figure out where they're getting their answers from. I don't know, some of those things. So I think building tools for instructor insights, and then likewise for individuals like myself and many of the others up here on the panel that are helping to design these courses, giving us data back to design better courses, to where it's not just how the students are doing, but how are the assignments doing. So if you have the same type of idea of, on the y-axis, you have overall time spent in the course, and on the x-axis is basically the score in the course. What are my underperforming assignments? What are my assignments that are potentially too easy? Some of those things. It gives me data as a subject matter expert. While I might not be teaching all 120 sections of the course that are out there, I can use the data that I get to create a better course ultimately for adjuncts or other teachers that are using some of that content. So I guess kind of in summation, it's again, it's an honor to be sitting in the room with you because I share a similar heartbeat with each of you, because ultimately at the end of the day, we want the learning to take center stage for our students, and I think we would all ultimately agree in that. With these new technologies and these new platforms, at least from the McGraw-Hill perspective, we are trying to make it a consistent look and feel to where ultimately your student experience through your learning management system, it takes center stage, and then we will supplement it with data and tools in the back end that ultimately are seamless into your learning management system. So, thank you.